Okay, welcome to this instructional video for PMGS StampFix version 2. This is the initial release of version 2, version 2.05. This represents some substantial changes between the version 1 releases of the app, so my intent behind this is both to go over the basic functions of the app for those who may not have used it before, and to show some of the new features in version 2 for those who have used the version 1 releases before. This version does bring an almost total rewrite of the code behind the app in an attempt to improve the performance and make it considerably easier for me to maintain. In addition, I took the opportunity while I was working on it to put in some new features that I hope will help some folks out that have contacted me with issues they've had in the past with certain images that they were trying to process. That does bring to mind the one request that I do have for folks as you're using the app is if you do run into any bugs, to please let me know by contacting me through the contact form on the footer of the webpage where you would have downloaded this, germanstamps.net. There are going to be some bugs in this version simply because it was a total rewrite of the code, and I don't expect to have gotten them all out at the very beginning. So if you see something that isn't behaving as you think it should, please contact me and let me know. In addition, if you've got an image that you're trying to process and you're just not having any luck with it, if you contact me, I can send you an email address to send that image to me. Sometimes it's just a matter of finding the right settings and sending them back to you. And sometimes it's an actual problem with an image that the app just can't handle. And in those circumstances, it's important for me to get those because that's how I make changes to the app going forward. All of the new features that you'll see here today, if you're used to version 1, are features that have been added because somebody sent me an image that they weren't able to process, and I was trying to find a way to make it work with them. So those are very valuable going forward. So if you do run into anything that is either a bug or it's just not working like you think it should, to please contact me. That information is very valuable for developing future versions of the app. So without further ado, let's get started. When you first open the app, this here on the left is the window that you'll see. And the first thing you're going to want to do is some initial setup. Even if you've been using version 1 and you're just upgrading to version 2, there's still a little bit of initial setup that you'll need to do. The first thing is over here on the top right hand side, there's an icon of a little gear on a brown background. And if you click that button, that'll take you to the interface settings. This app runs on multiple operating systems, and the different operating systems work differently in terms of how their file chooser works. What the file chooser is when you click to load or save anything, it's this window here that pops up. And by default on Windows, when you open the file chooser, it opens up to your home folder. I think it's called This PC on the latest versions. Which is very inconvenient because rarely are you storing anything directly in that folder, and often means you have to make multiple clicks to get to where your working files are. And by default on a Mac, it opens to the last folder that you had opened in the operating system, which is actually fairly convenient. I don't know what the default behavior is in Linux. I think it's similar to a Mac. What this screen does is it allows you to change the behavior of that. And this is mainly because when I first wrote the app, I was annoyed by Windows default behavior, and I wanted to change it. So you have three options here. The first is open to the operating system's default folder. If that's selected, then that's the behavior you're going to get, which is in Windows, it will open to this PC, and on a Mac, it will open to the last folder that you had opened in the operating system. If you change it to open to user default folder, it's always going to open to whatever folder you have in this blank. And you can change that by clicking this little folder icon and picking a new folder. And if you set one in here and you select open to user default folder, the file chooser will always open to that folder. And then finally, the last option is open to last folder. And what that will do is, even if you're on Windows, it will always open to the last folder that you had open in the app. It's slightly different from the Mac's default behavior in that the Mac opens to the last folder that you had open in the operating system. Open to last folder here works within the app. So whatever the last folder that you had open within the app, the file chooser will always open to that folder. That's the one I typically recommend because for most folks' workflow, that's the most convenient. The next thing you're going to want to look at as part of your setup are the default settings. When you first install the app, it installs or it puts values in all of the blanks that have to have values in them. It gives you the option, however, of saving your own default values. If there's something that you know you're going to want to change from the defaults that it comes with, for example, depending on what resolution you scan at, a 20 padding may not be correct. You may need to do a 10, or you may find that the best processing setting for you is a 75. And what you don't want to have happen is every time you load the app, you have to manually change those values. So what it lets you do is it lets you save your defaults. The green button up here, if you click that, it'll ask you if you want to save the current settings as your new user default. You click OK. And then after that point, anytime you go into the app, those will be the values that are pulled up. If in the course of working on something, you've changed these to something else, and you need to get them back to your defaults, you can just click the load defaults, and it will reset them back to where you just saved them to. And if at any point you need to reset the settings back to what they were when you first install the app, the pink button here will reset them all back to the installation defaults. This is actually a valuable troubleshooting tool. These preferences, these default settings, are stored in a preferences file on your computer. And for some reason, and it happens with Windows more often than with a Mac, for some reason on occasion that file gets a little wonky, and a value will not get written correctly to it. And I have yet to figure out exactly why. I don't know that if it's something with the app or if it's something with the communication with your operating system. But the solution to that is usually just to do a reset to the factory default settings and then go back in and put your own settings back in and resave them. So if you run into trouble with the preferences, that's really the solution, is just to do a factory reset using the pink button, type your own values back in, and then resave them. And I'm going to put these back to where I need them for my demo here. This yellow button over here is a reset button. What it does is it resets the entire workspace back to where it was when you first opened the app for this session. It is similar to the load defaults in that both of them will reset all of these settings back to your default settings. The difference is with the reset, it resets everything. It will get any images off the screen that you had up, and it will reset everything back to your defaults. With the load default settings, it doesn't clear whatever image you have loaded. It resets the settings, but it doesn't clear the image off the screen. So that's the main difference between the reset and the load defaults. It's just whether it's clears the image off the screen. So if you've got an image up and you want to change the settings to your defaults without losing that image, you use the load defaults. If you don't care if you lose the image, you do a reset and just reload the image back in. The next setting we're going to cover is the overrides for the auto detect features. As the app was designed to process multiple files at one time, there's a certain amount of auto detection that goes on for it to determine kind of how to route images through the various areas of the code. And it doesn't always get it right. And so there's a couple overrides built in here that allow you to manually kind of direct traffic through the app. The number of stamps per image override, this one carries over from version 1. So if you've used version 1, you may be familiar with this one already. The background color one is new with this version. So as to the number of stamps per image, if you've got an image like this that has a single stamp in the image, there's a certain amount of processing that goes on, and then it will rotate it and crop it as a single. If you've got an image like this that has multiple stamps per image, the first thing it attempts to do is to determine the number of stamps in the image and then draw boxes around them that then let you kind of fine-tune your selections before you do anything with them. And when you load a file up, the first thing the app does is it attempts to determine how many stamps are in the image, and then that will determine which route it goes down with the code. But it doesn't always get it right. This is usually one of two things. Either you're loading up an image that doesn't have a clean background on it. If you've scanned in the stamps while they were still sitting on the stock page or still in a dealer card, the app can have trouble detecting the stamps simply because there's too much clutter in the image. Or postcards. If you load up a postcard, let me see if I've got one I can use as a demo here. And I'm not going to load the postcard into the app because this one actually works correctly, which would defeat the point of my demo here. The app has trouble sometimes with postcards because it doesn't know whether you're attempting to isolate the postcard from the dark background or the dark stamp from the light postcard background. The app works based on detecting the lines between light and dark, and there's too many options here, and sometimes it'll have trouble. So what this allows you to do is to kind of force its hand. So if you load up a single stamp here, and the auto detector is going to turn on, it's usually pretty good about detecting that that's a single. If you load up a multiple, it's going to, again, with the auto detect, do a pretty good job with this of detecting that there's multiples. And you can tell it's in the multiple mode if you've got the green boxes around the stamps. And at that point, you then have some other options that we'll get into here in a minute with regards to what to do with it. But every once in a while, and it's usually always in one direction. It's usually if you're loading up a multiple and it only detects one box on the screen, only detects one stamp, it will try to process it as a single, and it will look kind of like this, where you don't get the green boxes that come with the multiple mode, and you got a weird crop going on where it basically tries to treat this block as one image instead of 4 smaller images. And when that happens, the solution is to turn it off of auto or off of single and over to multi-mode. And when you're in multi-mode, it will force it to treat it as a multiple and usually do a much better job of picking out the individual stamps. If you drop a single into multi-mode, you notice in single mode, it automatically rotates and crops it. In multi-mode, it draws the box around it, and you've got one more step that you need to take, which we'll get to when we cover multi-processing here in a minute, before you can get a final product out of it. But that's what this setting allows you to do, is to kind of force its hand in terms of how it processes the images. So if you're having difficulty, and it's usually, like I said, going to be you're loading up a multi, and it only detects one box, then it's going to force it into single mode, which isn't always correct. And you can kind of force its hand by using these buttons. The one other thing to remember is if you're doing multiple files at one time, if you're going to grab a bunch and drop them in here, and they're a mixed bag, if some of them are multiple stamps per image and some of them are singles, you're going to need to have it in auto mode. Otherwise, you're going to get some weird results. If you put it in auto mode, it will analyze each image individually and just switch back and forth between single and multi as necessary. The other auto detect here that you can override is the background color, and this is new as of this version, and I put this in very early in version 2 development, and then by the time I got to the end, it was largely unnecessary, but it's still there. What this allows you to do is to force it into treating the image as having a black background or a white background. The code for the different color backgrounds is very similar. There's only like 1 or 2 places where the code differs based upon what the background color is. And the way that the old app determined what the background color was it would just look at the top left corner of the image. And this could cause problems if, for example, you had an image like this. This is one a user sent me. Let's see if I can shrink it to where you can see it here. Whereas you can see there's a white bar at the top and a white bar at the bottom from where the scanner lid was white, and the user put the stamps on the scanner, put some black paper or something over the top of them, but there's still white showing from the scanner lid, and that was throwing the calculations off because in version 1 it would have looked at this top left corner, seen that that was white, thought that this was a white background, and tried to process it as a white background. It just didn't work. So what I've done now is I've given you the ability to kind of force it into a black background or a white background. Like I said, in the end, this ended up not being as big of a change as I thought it would be, simply because I also changed the auto detection of the background color, so that now instead of looking at the top left color, it looks at the whole image and it gets a much more accurate reflection of what the background color is. But if you need to force it, and 99.9% of the time you'll never need to do this, but if you need to force it into a particular background color, you can by just switching these buttons back and forth. And in the end, I think you'll find that it doesn't make much of a difference. The threshold setting down here will make far more of a difference than the background color switch here, but it's there in case you, if you know you're always going to be scanning on a black background, you can just set it to black, save that as a default, and move on with life and never worry about it. If you're going to be doing a mixed bag of some stamps that are black and some that are white, you might find some use in it. But what I find is most people have a background color that they use simply based on how their scanner's set up, and that's the way they tend to roll. So, but it's there in case you need it, and you can, if you're getting some weird results and you're using different background colors, you can force it and see if you get a better result out of it. Okay, let's load up some images and get to processing. You load images in the app in one of three ways. One way is the button up here at the top left. Now, if you're used to version 1 of the app, there was a row of buttons across the top. There was one button for loading a single file with a single stamp in it. There was one button for loading a single file with multiple stamps in it. There was one button for loading multiple files at one time, and there was one button for loading a folder full of files. All of that's been condensed down now to this one load button, with the exception of folders. The file chooser in Mac and Windows will only let you choose either files or folders. You can't do both at the same time. So I went with files. We'll show you how to get folders in here in a minute. But you open up the file chooser here, and you can select either one or multiple stamps. We'll go one for the purposes of this demo. So I'll choose a single stamp, and it will load up this single image of a single stamp and process it. You can also use the button to load up a multiple, like this. You can use it to load multiple files at one time. So if I load up, let's do this one, and that one. And when you load up multiples at one time, it doesn't display them to the screen. It automatically processes them. You'll see the little progress bar up here at the top start moving. And down here, you'll see them getting outputted. There's two other ways in addition to this button up here to get images into the program. One is, and this is a new feature as of version 2, is you can just double click in the window here and it will pop up the same file chooser. So that instead of going to the button up here, you can just double click. That is enabled at most times in the app. There's a couple spots where the double click is disabled for reasons I'll get to when we get to those. But for the most part, all you have to do is just double click in the window in most places and it will work. The other option is to drag and drop. You can drag and drop a single in here, it will process it. You can drag and drop a multiple in here, it will process it. And again, you can grab multiple files, drop them in here. It will tell you 2 files processed, 5 images extracted, and if we go over here, there they are. Okay. This is also the way to get folders in. You can't, like I said before, you can't get folders into the app through the file chooser just because the file chooser is either or. You can't do files and folders with the file chooser. So what I've got here is a test folder, and it's got some images in it, and it's got a subfolder with some images in it, and then another subfolder with some images in it. And it's additionally got some files in here that are not images. It's got an RTF file, and it's got some WebP images, which the app does not support the WebP image format. And so you'll notice if I just drag this folder over here and drop it, progress bar will start moving. You'll see a folder get built over here, and it will pop up an error report. This error report is just telling me that there were unsupported file formats in the folder. As it's going to process files, it does a check to make sure that the files that are in the folder are the proper format that the app works with, and if they're not, it just skips them. And this is just telling me it skipped those files. And you'll notice in my output folder over here, it has rebuilt the folder structure and processed all these images in the folders and the subfolders and put them where they belong. So that's how that works. Okay, so that's button to load images, that's double clicking over here to get the file chooser to load images, and that's drag and drop to load images into the program. The 3 different ways that you can get images into the program. Next up, I'm going to show you the processing settings. So these are the settings on the processing tab over here. And this is what really controls the basic function of the crop and the rotation. So if I load up a single stamp here, it's going to automatically rotate it and crop it. Now here's what the original image looked like. It was already pretty straight, but it had a lot of extra background on it there. And what these 4 settings do is it really controls the basic crop and rotation here. This threshold slider is also this threshold blank. You can manually type a number in here, or you can just use the slider. And what the threshold does is it kind of controls when the app looks for edges between light and dark. There's this value controls kind of what it sees as light and what it sees as dark. If you're using a black background, somewhere in the 75 to 125 range is usually going to be right about the right number. If you're using a white background, it's going to need to be probably up in the 225 range. But you can see as I move this slider, it will reprocess it, and you'll notice slight changes in the way it displays and crops the app. And you just got to find the number that works best for you. What I've found is that it really depends on your scanner background and kind of how deep the black is. If you're using a black background, as to exactly what that number needs to be. And you will typically find that if you're using the same background on all your scans, if your scanner background is usually the same color, you'll find a number. You can set that as your default and probably not have to mess with it very much, simply because once you find that number for the kind of shade of your background, that will usually do it. Unless, of course, you've got a stamp that has a very dark cancel. Sometimes you have to make some modifications there to take that into account. Next up is the initial rotation setting. This setting works in 90-degree increments, and the purpose of this is often you have an image like this where the stamp is rotated on its side or upside down. And the app doesn't actually look at the face of the stamp to tell what side's up and what side's down. It's simply rotating to the nearest square. So if I load this stamp in here, it's going to rotate it to the nearest square, but it's still not right side up. And so this setting allows you to rotate it right side up. If you put something other than a 90-degree increment, it's gonna round it to the next closest 90-degree increment. And you can do negative numbers as well as positive. So negative 270 is the same as positive 90, for example. So that's what that does. And we'll leave that 90 in there for this purpose here. What the fine-tuning adjustment does is after it's rotated and cropped, this allows you to make minor adjustments to it. Or major adjustments, depending on what number you want to put in here. The reason for this is often you won't get a perfectly square rotation if you've got something like a long perf on one side, or perhaps you've got the stamp design is not level with the perfs of the stamp, and you'd rather have the design level as opposed to the perfs level. And this allows you to just make minor adjustments. So for example, I can throw a 2-degree rotation in here and it will rotate it 2 degrees to the right. You can do fractions here. So 0.4 would be a 0.4 degree rotation. You can do negatives. So negative 0.5 would be a ½ degree to the left rotation. So that's what that does. And then padding controls the distance between the stamp and the edge of the image. This will vary depending really on the resolution that you use. I think this is probably a 600 DPI scan, and that's about 20 as a padding. If I drop it down to 10, you can see there's the stamp is closer to the edge of the image. The larger the resolution that you scan in, the larger this number is going to need to be to get the same effect. So for example, a 10 padding on a 600 DPI image, you'd need to up that to 20 on a 1200 DPI image to get the same amount of space. So that's what that does. So those are the settings that control the processing of the individual stamps, the rotation and the cropping. This next tab, multi-detect, it controls the settings for actually detecting the individual stamps within a larger image containing multiple stamps. These settings define kind of how the boxes get detected and drawn, and then once the stamps are extracted out of the larger image, it's again these processing settings that determine how they're rotated and cropped. I'll get that 90 degree off there before we do something we're not going to like here. All right, so back to my multi-detect settings here. The first one is the detection threshold. Now this threshold setting works the same way as the one over here on the processing tab. They're just applied at different times. This one is for use in detecting the stamps within the larger image. This one is used for actually rotating and cropping the individual stamps. The reason there's two settings here is often the best setting for detecting the stamps is not the best setting for getting an accurate rotation and crop on the back end. So that's why there's two, because you may find an instance where you need to have a different setting in the detection process than you do in the actual processing process. This next slider, increase the box size, increases by a multiplier. This is a multiplier of 1.15 roughly right now. Increases the box size around the stamps. If you drop it all the way to 1, you're not going to get an accurate crop of the stamps, because the detection process, there's a little bit of blurriness around the edges, and if you drop that all the way to 1, you're probably going to lose the tips of the perfs on these stamps. So this just controls kind of how big that box is. The reason this becomes important is if you've got stamps that are scanned close together on the page. Now this example here, they're scanned pretty far apart, but what you don't want to have happen is you expand this box so large that it runs into the stamp next to it, because if you do that, you won't get an accurate rotation and crop. So you want the box to be big enough to enclose the stamp, but not so large that it runs into the stamp next to it. The minimum and maximum box sizes, this gives you some control over which boxes are shown and which boxes aren't. Let me drag a different image over here to show this one. So this image has stamps of different sizes, and let's say you decided you didn't want the large stamps on there. All you'd have to do is drop this maximum box size down a good bit, and eventually you would lose the larger boxes on the screen like that. Where this is most helpful, though, let me get those back, is in getting rid of debris that gets detected. Now right now there's 12 stamps on the screen, there's 12 in the box count, that's all correct. If you drop this minimum box size all the way down to 1, you're going to see that this number changes to 13 because it's picking up a small piece of debris down here at the bottom of this stamp. And if you tried to process this image with that box still on there, you may get an error because it may not be able to process that tiny little speck. And the way to get rid of that speck is just to up the minimum box size until it disappears. And now we're back to having 12 boxes for 12 stamps, and all's well and good there. So that's the main benefit of the minimum maximum box sizes, is allowing you to filter out junk that may get picked up by the detection algorithm, or to get rid of larger boxes if you decide you don't want larger items drawn on the screen. And then finally, once you have all of the images where you want them, you've got a couple options when it comes to getting them actually saved out into file. One is this extract and save to file. When this is clicked, what it will do is it will take everything that's in a box, it will process it using these processing settings and output it using these output settings, and save it to whatever location you have selected down here in the output settings. So if I click this, let me see where my output's going. All right, that's correct. It's going to go to this folder over here on the right. If I click extract and save to file, there they are. One file processed with 12 images, and there they are. But you notice several of these are oriented wrong because they were oriented wrong here, and I didn't make any effort to fix them. if you need to do individual changes to the stamps that are selected, so for example, rotating these back up where they belong, you go to Edit Stamps Individually, and it will open up a new screen. All right, and now you can see all 12 of those stamps individually. There are individual settings for each stamp next to each stamp. These on the left, these are global settings. So if you want to apply something to all of these at once, you change it over here and click Apply, and it will apply it across all of them, with the one caveat that if you change something in here, like if I drop that to 90, and then I go over here and say I want to apply a 110, apply and reprocess, it's going to pop up a warning, because once you make a global change over here and it applies to everyone, it's going to overwrite any of the changes you've already made. So see, that 90 gets changed to a 110. I'll change that back to 100 so I get a good result here. All right, and it will reprocess everything with the new settings. And then you can go through on an individual basis and make changes to the individual stamps. Now, these 4 boxes here are the same as these 4 here. So the second one down is the initial rotation. I can go in here and I can say, give me a 90-degree rotation on that one. Give me a 180-degree on that one. Give me a negative 90-degree on that one. And everybody's all straight, well and good now. The naming options, these are the same options as on the main screen. I didn't go into those yet, so let me cover that here. This is a very powerful feature, and this is actually, on this screen, is the best place to watch it in action, because you can see the changes made without having to actually save anything to file. If you want to add a prefix, you can just type a prefix in here. The separator is for things like dashes, and the separator comes in handy if you're incrementing. So for example, if I say 15 as a prefix and increment it, and I can put a dash there, and when I hit apply, what's going to happen is the first one will get the 15 prefix, the next one will get 16, 17, 18, so forth and so on. If I don't increment it, then they all get the 15. Suffix works the same way. Core works the same way, with one exception, and that is this block that says file name is core. And when that is checked, the original file name is going to get inserted in as part of the core file name. If you don't check that, you're just going to get a series of numbers. But then when I add the file name back in, I get the original file name and the number. And the reason for the addition of the number there is that when you're extracting multiple images from a single file, you need new file names for all the rest of them, and so that everybody gets a unique file name. I do have a note here that the file names may not match the settings if overwrite protection is checked on the output tab. Overwrite protection keeps you from overwriting existing files on your hard drive. If it detects that there's a file in your output location that has the same name, it will automatically add like a -2 or -3 or whatever's appropriate on the end of it. So if you see a file name in here that doesn't exactly match what you're expecting out of the naming options, that's probably because there's already a file in your output folder with that name, and it's adjusting the file name accordingly to avoid overriding that. If you want to turn that off, you have to go back here to the output tab and turn off the overwrite protection. The other items on the output tab here, the format being the same as, these are the same as source, will output the file in the same file format that the input was. The rest of these give the option to convert it to a different format on its way out. The resizing option allows you to resize the image to a percentage or a maximum value based upon what's in this block. And this output location here, if this is not checked, it's going to output to wherever the input file came from. If you have a specific location you want the files outputted to, you just check this box. You put that location right here. You can click this folder if you want to select a location, and it will update it in there. And then you probably want to save that to your defaults after you do that. This is very handy to avoid overwriting your input files, or if you're like me and you just output them to one folder and then you organize them from there into wherever you store them long term. That's a handy way to do that. So that's it for the basic functions of processing a single image and processing multiple images. There are a few additional ways to do it here that I'll cover. Let me clear. The first is the target box. This is a feature that is carried over from the last version, as is the bypass, which we'll cover here in a second. What the target box does is it minimizes the window and opens up a small target. And with this target there, anything you drag onto it is going to get processed using the settings that were in the main menu, or the main window. So if I drag that there, you can see this immediately gets outputted here. That's just handy in case your workspace on your desktop is limited and you don't want this the gigantic StampFix window up all the time. You can just have a small target to drop onto. What the bypass button here does, the default behavior of the app, when you drop a single file onto the app, it's going to process it and display it on the screen. That's regardless of whether there's a single stamp or a multi-stamp. Sometimes you may not want to do that. You may want to just drag it over there and have it go straight to a file on your hard drive. And that's what this bypass button does. If I click the bypass button, now when I drag a single file over here, it's going to process it and it's going to dump it into the output folder here. And you'll notice this one got a -2 added to the end of the file name because there was already a file in that folder with the same name. So that's the overwrite protection kicking in. Works the same with the multi-stamp. If I drag a multi-stamp over here with the bypass turned on, it doesn't display it on the screen. It just immediately processes it and spits the files out into the output folder. Okay, on to some of the new features added in version 2 in an attempt to help folks process images that version 1 would not have handled. Let me start by showing you this one. So when I load up this image, it's going to generate an error. And in the old app, this would have stopped everything. It would have just simply been unable to process it, and that would have been the end of it. You can still load it in version 2, but as you'll note, nothing actually happened here. It didn't get rotated and cropped. There are no boxes drawn. The box counts 0 over here. It just couldn't make sense out of this and process it. And that's because it's sitting in this card. And again, the app looks for differences between light and dark to find the stamps, and there's just way too much going on in the background here for it to be able to find the stamps. So I built in a couple features to try to fix this problem so that hopefully in the future folks who like to scan their stamps without taking them out of the stock pages or out of the dealer cards can still get good scans to work in the app despite having backgrounds that aren't perfect. The first option is this crop option. It's this red button up here at the top, and if I click that, now when I hold down the left mouse button, I can drag and draw a rectangle. And when I release the left mouse button, everything that's in that rectangle is going to get processed as if it was a new image. So I'm managing to get rid of all of that white card in the background. It will recalculate. And now I've got 2 boxes where it found the 2 stamps, and I can treat those as I would any other multiple image. I can go over here to edit them individually, and I can see them individually. Or I can hit extract and save to file. And here they are, extracted out to file. There is one other option. If I load that image back up again. Okay. There is an option to manually add bounding boxes. That's this little blue hand icon with a plus on it. If I click that, same thing. If I hold down the left mouse button and drag, now I'm going to get a yellow box, and everything that's in that yellow box is going to recalculate and attempt to find stamps within that yellow box, and it did find them. It highlighted them in blue. The difference between that and the crop, as you'll notice, it didn't actually crop out the rest of the image. So if you've got an image that you need to kind of manually direct its attention in some direction without getting rid of the rest of the image, like a crop would, this will enable you to just manually kind of draw a box to force the app to look in that tiny sub area for a stamp. if you were to load that image up again, and let's say that you didn't want both of them, you could easily just go in here and say, I just want this one, and it will look in that sub area, try to find one, and if it finds it, it draws it. One other use for this blue button up here that lets you manually add boxes to the screen. I'm going to load up an image here, and this image it finds nothing on. The stamps are too close together. This is one that the user provided me that they were having trouble with. Box count of 0. It's way too much going on here for the app to find anything. What this button will also allow you to do is you can go in here and you can draw these yellow boxes, and you notice no little blue boxes are getting drawn because it's still not finding any stamps. They're just way too close together there. But you can manually draw these boxes like this. You could say, hey, I want to draw one around everything. And then this little purple box, this will extract all of these sub images out without even attempting to rotate and crop them. It's basically just allowing you to extract portions of the image without any attempt at rotation and cropping. So it'll, if you want to use the app without the rotation and crop features, just to crop out individual sub images, you can do that now using this blue button here to add boxes, and then this little purple button to just extract them out. And this final button, the little green hand up here, what that is, let me drag an image in here. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to let's say I wanted to get rid of some of these green boxes. I click that little green button while it's toggled on. When I right click inside that green box, I can now manually remove a green box. And if I had added in some other boxes, let's say that I had drawn in a manual yellow box, which then auto detected a blue box within it, I can right click and say I want to remove the yellow box, I want to remove the blue box, whatever the case may be. Gives you a lot more control over what is selected on the screen for processing. So that's the basic gist of the app. We've covered all of the functions that are within it. If you have any questions or any problems as you go forward trying to use it, please don't hesitate to contact me through the contact form in the footer of my website, germanstamps.net, or on any of the stamp forums where I'm active as Postmaster GS. Good luck with it. If you have any problems or questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Thanks a lot.